Kevin, call the Monday, June 20th Personnel Committee meeting to order. Dana, could you take roll call, please?
Alderman Barber is excused, Alderman Nelson is excused, Alderman Holfer is excused. Dale Weichel.
Here.
Tom Trainer. Here. Richard Budney.
Here.
Frank Presco.
Here.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 2, citizen comment period. Is there any citizen who would like to make a comment? Hearing none, close that. Item 3, approval of minutes from 1/17/22. Has everybody had a chance to review them? Review them? Is there a motion to approve?
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve. Any further comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Approval of an updated job description for the position of lieutenant in the fire department, consolidating fire lieutenant and paramedic lieutenant into one job description. Want to say something about that? Or?
That update just kind of reflects what we've gotten to as far as bargaining with the bargaining unit. We don't have any EMTs anymore, so it doesn't necessarily make sense to keep that in one job description. That was in the fire lieutenant job description, and the bargaining unit are in favor of this change and this update. So,
Dana, do you have anything? I guess I got a question. It doesn't make any difference, but this job of lieutenant in the fire department is fairly similar to the captain job in the police department, isn't it? Or
it's a step down. It's more like their sergeant position.
okay. I guess my question is, this is a union job, right?
Yes.
How come the captain and the sergeant are not, the captain and the sergeant are non-union and the lieutenant is union? It just sort of...
It has to do, I believe, with the number of steps of management in the structure. Lieutenant is a bargaining unit position in pretty much every department in the country. It's a direct kind of like a squad leader position. When a company goes out, it's a 4-person group. They have a lieutenant that's kind of running the show for that group.
Obviously, I respect your opinion. I'm not against it. It's just, respect your opinion. I'm not against it. It just seemed kind of peculiar.
Lieutenant, like in the police department, is almost like our assistant chief. It's just a different structure.
Okay. Does anybody have any comments or if not, are you prepared to make a motion?
I make a motion to approve. Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve. Any further discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Item 5, update on potential staffing changes to the health department.
That's me.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Good to meet you. I'm Lauren Gottlieb with the health officer in the health department. And tomorrow, our body to change the position from public health manager and transfer that position and budget item from the 2022 budget that reads manager to public health specialist. I formerly was in the public health manager position, and I just wish to hire now that as a public health specialist. So I the committee and the council as well, but now just looking to switch back.
So there was some tenure with Lauren. Lauren had been here a number of years and kind of worked her way into a program manager position, so I think, maybe the one thing that Lauren didn't say, and Lauren, please correct me if I'm wrong, but this might be something you want to change back, and Lauren didn't say, and Lauren, please correct me if I'm wrong, but this might be something you want to change back in the future to a public health manager, just depending on the personnel. But this was just approved by this body last June, and then the council in July. Because at that time, we had a health director that had been here a number of years. We had somebody that was in a position to. Today, we don't have that same scenario, so I think this temporary move, if you will, is what's being requested.
How's the structure of the health department now? Who's in charge, I guess?
Currently, it's myself as the health officer. Public health manager is vacant since I've moved up into specialists. Well, we don't right now, but that's what I'm requesting. We would have public health nurses and public health specialists.
Okay.
Beneath that.
And in the future, it would be changed again?
Potentially, and that depends on the climate of public health, the needs of our department, what we're looking for in our internal needs of our department, what we're looking for in our internal leadership. But as of right now, it would be requested as a public health specialist.
You indicated public health nurse and then public health specialist?
Correct.
Two different.
Yes, we have two different positions. Public health nursing would have clinical special positions. Public health nursing would have clinical specialty embedded in the role, and a public health specialist would have more of a community health assessment, community programmatic lens embedded in their role.
How many?
And those are both competitive.
How many each?
Right now, we have currently only public health nursing staff, and then one drug-free communities coalition coordinator who is solely grant funded. So right now, we have no public health specialists in our department.
How many nurses?
We have 2 full-time nurses, Kim and Quinn, and then we have a part-time nurse, Amy, and a part-time nurse, Leslie.
Okay. Any further questions, comments? Is anybody prepared to make a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second motion made?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Review of the Director of Clerk Services position and timing of hiring due to impending retirement of coming position posting. Sandy, we're gonna miss you.
I'm gonna miss it.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Do you have enough for everybody?
Did you wanna,
I wasn't even aware it was on the agenda, so it's not my item.
okay.
I saw it on the agenda, but I'm not here to speak on it. I'm agenda, but I'm not here to speak on it. I
Okay.
guess I'm here to listen.
Okay.
So I can take the lead chair?
Yes.
Okay, so in front of you, what we just passed out was an evaluation. Usually whenever there's a position opening, it was an evaluation. Usually whenever there's a position opening and pending, we want to make sure we go out and see where the pay is at, make sure we're competitive, make sure we're going to be able to recruit, et cetera. So the communities you see listed here are all the communities that we have in our normal class and compensation study for our comparables. For our comparables. So the first 2 columns, you can see those ranges, the range, the minimum and the maximum of the existing position throughout these organizations. We do have Muskego down on the bottom just because it's really not a comparable position. They have what they call an administration director. You'd see that 78,593 to 104,940. Then you can see our range, Franklin's range, the 82,340 to the 111,157. Then the next column, you can see the current wages of all of those positions in all those communities. Average of the comparables, 91,117. That's there. So we don't think that is out of line at all. Again, the institutional knowledge and all of the experience and abilities that we have is obviously different from what you'll see on that list, but of course that's likely going to be changing. The next column, you'll see the population comps, just that's likely going to be changing. The next column, you'll see the population comps, just so you can see where we're talking about from that perspective. And then perhaps not necessarily indicative of pay, but more for recruiting. We want to make sure, what do other communities have as far as wards and ballots, because number of different ballots and wards, because number of different ballots and wards, because we want to make sure we get somebody that can handle that. So, I think what you see in front of you is what today's situation looks like. The position is currently a grade 11 in our structure. Two specific things that we want to come out of tonight, if possible, is, for the committee to look at this, give any feedback they want. In our position description, we just have an old salary range. It's just simply because the position hasn't been filled in so long and it hasn't been switched over to the new salary grade. So fine to change that salary level to 11, which is the current grade in our salary structure. And then the other thing, this isn't necessarily for the committee, but this is going to council tomorrow night, and anything that the committee recommends will go as well. But the council then will also be considering an early hire. We'd like to get that recruitment training and some crossover done. We're not sure, but that's what we'd like to make an attempt at.
Okay, so if it's changed to a 11, that doesn't mean that it would start at a higher rate, right?
The position remains at an 11, which is it's currently at. The minimum is 82,340, and it just really depends on what our candidate pool looks like. And if we had somebody with a lot of experience, certainly it would be up to the market rate, which is 101,071, which is 101,071, which could be hired without special council approval. Do we think we're going to get that? We're just not sure what we're going to see as far as that goes. The mayor, full disclosure, the mayor did just get this survey today because I was unfortunately out last week with a family emergency, but he's contemplating, what he'd like to do as far as a recommendation. If he has any recommendation on a salary grade change, he would bring that back, because again, that's in the position description and that's a committee recommendation to the council. But that prohibit us from going ahead with posting the position and starting the recruitment, because we really don't see it really being hired, that high. It would just be depending on the candidate pool where we would go with that.
So what you're looking for tonight is
Change of the salary level, keep it the same as it is, just change it on the job description, because it's just a very old job description.
okay, was this 11 presently? Oh, it was.
Yep.
Okay.
So it's really just, because on the job description, that fourth line down, you see salary level, and it says management/administrative/supervisory level 9. That's just really from the old schedule.
Okay.
So we're bringing that up to what the current day is, not recommending any changes at this point.
Okay.
So just updating the job description, minor.
Any questions or comments? Any questions or comments? This is way too easy. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve. Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Approval of an intern approval authorization policy.
So this item, and I was kind of hoping Alderman Barber would be here because this item was one of his recommendations. We had an intern two intern agreements at the last common council meeting that, because it was an agreement or a contract, it was a council approval. So Alderman Barber, the mayor talked about it, and then Alderman Barber wanted it recommended to personnel. So basically that draft policy that you see would attorney on the contract language to be able to handle hiring of interns. And sometimes interns are paid and sometimes they're unpaid. The ones that happen to be just approved, those were unpaid. But the mayor also has the ability to hire temporary and casual employees without any things like the, what is the liability on the city, make sure it's okay with our insurance provider, things like that. So this is coming to the committee to say, Personnel Committee, do you believe that it would be okay for the mayor to approve an agreement for an intern, a limited term, somebody who's either in their education program or just within 1 year of that program, without it having to go to a council step? The reason that the mayor wanted it to be considered is because sometimes the timing of the council meetings is not conducive to making some of those decisions. When we get an offer from an agency, whether it be, it's usually an educational institution, but sometimes it's another agency, whether it be, it's usually an educational institution, but sometimes it's another agency that wants us to enter into an intern or internship arrangement.
Peggy,
Yes.
where would this individual actually work? Do we have, where would this individual actually work? Do we have a particular department?
So this is pretty broad. It could be any department that is under the mayor's purview. So if it was, let's just say the library board has jurisdiction over that, so then they would make the decision. This would be for any department for which has the kind of the final say, the hiring authority, and that would basically be every other department other than the library.
Okay. And what are we indeed paying this person?
This policy would not be for any specific, we don't have any, for example, if University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee would call next week and say, hey, we have some candidates in public health, maybe undergrad or a master's, that we need to get some kind of experience, would you be willing to take them on? Sometimes then our health department would say, wow, we have a project, we're going through our community health improvement plan right now. So kind of if there's a match there, if an institution like that asks us, then we usually only have a certain amount of time before they go to the next one and ask, and they tend to like our organization in that regard. So it wouldn't be for any specific position, it would just be the next time there's a possibility for an intern to be hired, can the mayor, with the concurrence of the city attorney with regard to the contract language, make that appointment?
We see some sort of a policy or a procedure or a job description for a procedure or a job description of a specific intern that we're intending to hire? Like if they're going to be in DPW, are they going to be on the fire truck? Are they going to ride along with the police department?
You never have for interns because they're non-classified and they don't ever gram. Interns are excluded.
All right, thank you.
And you're looking for a recommendation to the Common Council for approval?
Correct.
Has everybody had a chance to review it? Any further questions, comments?
Can an intern be an indefinite employee? I mean, can an intern be here for 2 years?
Not indefinite, but could it be for 2 years? It could be for 2 years, but definitely not intern by way of definition is a limited term employee. So it would be some kind of, like maybe if we master's degree in public health, they might be able to, maybe that's a 3-year program, so they might be able to be an intern for us for that long. I don't think we have any restrictions on that, just that it's a limited term. Is that correct, Dana?
I don't remember there being a time limit, but I
think
couldn't
it's-
say for sure.
I think limited term is included in there.
Are they covered under health insurance?
But I couldn't say for
I
sure.
think limited term is included in there.
Are they covered under health insurance or any
They
other?
are not.
No city benefits at all?
Nope.
Well, pay, Social Security, they're required, pay and
Well,
Social Security.
of course, but
Yep.
yeah. All right.
What is the pay from to? And that's going to be individualized, correct? Correct.
Correct.
That's why I'd
And
like to
sometimes
see
it's
that.
zero pay. Sometimes it's, they get credit for it, they're doing it for a class, they get credit for it. So basically, we act as their mentor, and then it's that way too. So it could be all of the above. I mean, we could certainly write up a job description, a general job description for, I'm not sure if pay is, I'm not sure if there's a lot of variation, like what that would look like, but we could certainly say what the roles are, what the limited term would be like.
If you don't mind.
So we could certainly do that.
Appreciate that. that.
Okay, any further questions, comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to recommend to the Common Council approval of the intern approval authorization policy draft?
So move.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. The next item is potential changes to sick leave incentives, severance pay policy.
Know about this, right? So we've had some discussions on this. This was really going to be a kickoff discussion with some of our newer members. Alderman Holford has not heard this discussion before, as well as Alderman Nelson. So it was really going to kind of be for the entire group to talk about how we get this kick started again. But seeing as how they're not there, I'll at least walk through what you have in front of you in your packet item. And then any feedback that you want to give us tonight would be great. If you want us to bring the item back as is next month, we can do that. Or if you want us to take it a little further, we're happy to do that. I think on page 1 of that document, you will see that there's different severance pay policies, and let's just define a little bit what severance pay. It's not what most people think of as severance pay. It's really like a sick leave payout, if you will. And we've had a lot of discussion. This is probably, I've been here 2 years this month, and I think we've probably started that discussion 3 months into. The very first paragraph that you see under city policy for all groups, that's what the non-represented employees have. There's basically a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 60 days. For every 1 year of tenure, an employee would get 2 days of severance after X 10 and 32 went through. It used to be much more like the police union contract, which is the second paragraph, and that is basically a minimum of 30 days, maximum of 60. So even if somebody has 0 sick leave less on the police force, on the represented police force, they're going to get 30 days of severance pay. Keep in mind, some of these are contract related, so the non-rep one that we talked about first obviously isn't. That's just a city policy. The police contract details are what is listed in that second paragraph, so if we would want to change that, that would be some direction to deal with that in negotiations. That's not a unilateral change by the city. And then the fire contract details, that's not a unilateral change by the city. And then the fire contract details start at the bottom of that page 1 and go into page 2, and I will just tell you it's a very complex formula. A lot of different thresholds as far as service times and different thing, and it goes all the way into the middle of page 3. So higher cap and a higher minimum. Just the lack of parity among all of those groups. Keep in mind that the police and fire command staffs are part of the non-rep group, so this is one of those items. Remember, we talked last November, we talked with the police sergeants, and they actually had a different request at comp time to what their union reps were. When we got into talking about it more, they said, well, that's really not important, but this is one of the bigger ones that's important that the city just hasn't been willing to address. We looked at it from a perspective of the lack of parity among the employment groups is kind of hard, because what we're doing is we're creating different classes. Parity among the employment groups is kind of hard, because what we're doing is we're creating different classes of employees, if you will. So what we were looking at is how could we make that different? We also had some concerns from the committee members as far as, wait a minute, if somebody uses all their sick leave up now, and for example, right now as a non-rep employee, you get care 1 day every month. But for every 4 months that you don't use any sick leave, you get an extra day. So that could be 15 days per year. I will tell you that is higher than the norm. It used to be the norm. 12 days a year used to be the norm among cities. I would say probably 15 plus years ago. Since then, 6X, 10, and 32 went, I would say a better average, and we haven't surveyed this year at all, but I would say a better average is somewhere around 8 days or so. But I think the comments that we had from the committee members were, people can either use it now or use it later, but you can't use both. So right now for me, I could use 10 days a year, save those 2, and still end up, I could use 10 days a year, save those 2, and still end up, if I have 15 years of service, get 30 days of severance. And the question is that the right way to go about it? Or perhaps, is there a bit of an incentive that we might want to change this incentive, not only making it more comparable for the reps to the reps, but also really putting some incentive in there for employees not to be sick, right? So if we have an employee that takes less than, this is just one example of one of the options in here, less than 3 days a year, you might earn, if you use less than 3 days a year, you might earn more time, whether that be if somebody uses less than a certain number of sick days per year, maybe you would want to give them a vacation bonus, right? Because that's, when people are there when we can count on them, it's worth paying a few extra bucks to not have them there, or to pay out when they leave at retirement. Certainly, Alderman Barber, I recall, talked about this, and he said, wait, we don't want to, compensability issue or a big liability to the city, we certainly don't want to do that. What we're trying to do is balance, incentivize, I hate to say this, but what I was just going to say is incentivizing people to come to work, but for better or for worse, that's what we do these days. So page 5 begins talking about some options. We had some committee feedback and some preliminary staff feedback, and then we do have some considerations on page 6, as well as starting on page 7, going into page 8. We had some recommendations on where we might want to go with that, what some options for implementation would be. So like I said, this meeting was some options for implementation would be. So like I said, this meeting was really just going to be, and I didn't explain it all in detail because you are all the people that were here when we did this, but I would like the rest of the committee members to kind of know how we got to this point, and then maybe if the committee could give us some feedback and direction on how to go forward. The ones that the police department command staff is waiting on, because their commitment to us was if we can do something with the sick leave incentive and make it a little more desirable for them, then they would drop the comp time issue. It wasn't that important to them. And again, I don't think that should be the motivation for the change, but I understand the reason for concern, which is why a number of the committee members have talked to us about it, and then we put this packet together. So
I suggest we bring it forward to the next meeting.
Sure.
With the other persons.
Yep.
I agree.
Yep.
I agree. I got a lot to say about this, and I think the good, I shouldn't say good, but I don't mean, the employees that have been conscientious and had their health should be rewarded, because people to replace them, if you don't have to have people to replace them, we're overstaffed. But I won't go into the rest of it. Is there a second to?
I just have one question.
Go ahead.
Were we not talking about removing sick days and replace them with personal time off days?
That's kind of the second part of this, and I didn't know if we were ready to bite off that entire topic, but yes, another way to do this, and it's one of the options in here, would be to look at this a little bit more globally. A number of communities, counties, towns and villages have changed over to PTO, and it's kind of interesting because we've only talked about it at the committee. Villages have changed over to PTO, and it's kind of interesting because we've only talked about it at the committee level so far, but I think some employees have gotten really nervous here. I've had to talk to them one-on-one because they think that we're trying to reduce benefits, when really, if it's somebody who comes to work on a regular basis, PTO is a much administer time off. So that's the message I've been giving to them, is we would not, well, a couple things. First of all, we would not be recommending that all employees change, right? There's some people that are a year or two away from retirement. If we change the policy to a certain way, we could actually negatively affect them. So I would ask for the consideration of the committee and the council at that point to understand where people are all at and try to find perhaps an integrated plan that we could implement so that we wouldn't negatively affect people. But we're having a lot of turnover, right? We have a lot of people that are getting ready to retire, and the workforce is much more mobile than it ever was before. So and the workforce is much more mobile than it ever was before. So a PTO structure could also give us a lot better chance for recruitment. Right now, here's our policies for time off. You earn vacation. The typical vacation is 2 weeks, 10 days a year. Now we do have up to 3 weeks, and we have a few that went up to 4, but very, very few. So basically it's 2 weeks of vacation, can't take vacation in the first 6 months. Then it's 1 day of sick leave per month, but you don't earn any and you can't use any for the first 6 months. Well, you can imagine that with COVID and everything going on with that, that's a problem. And then there's also per year up to the first 5 years. After that, you get 5. But those aren't very desirable for candidates wanting to come in here. A PTO structure would be. Another item kind of related to that I've been talking to some employees about that have asked me about it is there's been a community, and I'll just name it, Oak Creek, who went to a PTO schedule, not recognizing seniority and all of that. I think that's a mistake, because the way it works is you kind of work yourself up to things in our world anyway, and I think a lot of private sector organizations are the same way. But the more an employee gives to us, the more we can give back. They know their job, they can afford. Employee gives to us, the more we can give back. They know their job, they can afford to take off. There's a lot of things there. So I think that's really the ultimate, and I think that could solve a lot of problems we have. We talked about this before, but I'll just reiterate it. We have the people that hardly ever use sick leave. And we have some people that use it a little bit, and then we have the big users. We don't really have that many in between. So it's those people that are in between, who are coming to work every day and doing their thing, and they're seeing people take off whenever they want, 1 day a month. We have the 1 day a monthers. The problem with that is that becomes with that. However, when you go to more of a PTO structure, you kind of take that out of the mix. And again, if people have health issues and different things like that, we completely understand that, and we want to be supportive of that. But it doesn't make anybody feel like they get more or less, or feel like coming to work is a penalty versus taking my day off every month. So there's a lot of good, which was the first time we talked about it. It was maybe a little bit too new. Now that we've, again, just in the last year and a half, I have a list of probably, for sure, more than 15 communities, counties, et cetera, a lot of policies in place. So we're happy to go down that path. We think that could solve a lot of issues, help us with recruit, as well as recognize those employees that do their thing and come to work. Again, we're just looking for direction from the committee of, do we want to just bite off this little piece of the sick leave / severance pay, or do we want to talk about all time off? Essentially, we kind of have PTO already for vacation. We don't issue vacation on an annual basis. You don't have to use it on an annual basis. It's for a 3-week employee that has 3 weeks, it's like 4.62 hours per pay period, and it can accrue up to
150% of whatever.
And it can accrue up to
150% of whatever your yearly accrual is.
There you go. So we kind of do it for vacation. Rolling sick leave into it could solve our sick leave supervision issue. We want to make sure there'd still be a severance option in there, right? Because, again, whether we like it or not, we do have to have some kind of a carrot out there. I think a carrot is much more successful, especially when you're talking about a lot of different supervisors, than a stick when that comes, because they're still, but why do they get to do it if I can't do it? So levels for years of service, I think, would be very appropriate. It would just be if we're ready to enter that arena.
So do we make a motion that we're gonna combine this and the PTO, or?
No.
Is there?
No, right now,
general?
we're missing 3 pieces. So I think the best motion, and it's up to you 3, is to table this until next month and get a little bit more, bring back the options.
And we can
And go over it
certainly
more.
have this discussion then with them. And we did go down that PTO path a little bit. I had created a chart about how much as much as the committee wants, and have this same discussion next month.
So is it appropriate within the rules that I can make a recommendation that we would include this in the discussion next month?
Yes.
Because right now, this is only talking to us about how.
This is just,
Right now, this is only talking to us about how.
this is just talking points tonight.
This is limiting the discussion, and we're talking about expanding it to next week, next month.
Well, it can be whatever we ask it to be,
Okay, well
but
then,
we're asking it to include PTO. Am I
Okay, yes.
right in that? Okay. Is that,
Understood?
Would considering PTO and the amount of time it would take to get that organized, Is that timely enough to address this severance problem?
I think, going how quickly we can come to a recommendation, but including the PTO part in the discussion doesn't necessarily have to be, but we're not going to approve anything until we approve the PTO. We could still do that in steps. If we think if the committee wants to direct us to discuss them both and talk about how they'd all play together, but maybe you're right in discuss them both and talk about how they'd all play together, but maybe you're right in that, we have some requests from at least one non-rep group, the police sergeants, to do something about sick leave or severance pay policy. We could certainly advance that one a little bit faster and things like that. But in the big scheme of things, perfect world, it would be nice to kind of do it all together, just because then all the pieces work together the way that they're desired to versus doing it piecemeal. So definitely not a decision you have to make this next month or anything, but we can bring that back into the fold, the PTO discussion back into the month to think about it, and then we can see where it goes at the July meeting.
And it doesn't have to get done next month. I mean, let's say it's determined that PTO would be kind of a nice situation, but maybe let's look at it in a little different light. We want it in a little different light. We want to get it done, but we can put that.
It's been over a year since we had a good discussion about it. So
generally, the problem is that we start doing something, and then all of a sudden, and I'm not knocking it, Common Council comes up and says, "We need this yesterday," so this stuff gets dropped, and Peggy and they have to work on something else. So hopefully, we'll get it this time. Okay, is there a motion to table it until next month and also look at motion made and seconded, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Item 9 is also the discussion regarding military pay differential policy. I guess I'll start this. A few years ago, obviously, we were sending troops over to foreign countries and calling up reservists. And we had a policy that was not well defined about reservists being called up to the military. So there was one of our employees that got called up, a fiasco. It was terrible. There was people calling people unpatriotic, and it was just not good. So obviously we want to treat our employees, veterans, fairly. But so I've been asking for this to be brought up for the past 3 years at least. And what I would like to see is a set policy that is not subject to everything else, that's fair to everybody. Let me give you an example. There, obviously if a reservist gets called up, he gets his reserve pay. Well, there was talk about paying him. Well, there was talk about paying him his full city pay. That's not fair. There was also talk about who would cover health insurance. And it was just, let's make a deal. And it's just, like I said, when emotions are running high like this, it's not the right time to do this. So what I would like to see is the same as in option 8. Let's, same as in option 8. Let's, look at what our policy is now and come up with either determine that policy is right or come up with some corrections to it.
I'm not absolutely familiar with the policy, but what I have, I'm not absolutely familiar with the policy, but what I have seen in my previous employers have been, you take your military pay and what you normally make, and you pay the difference between the two.
Right.
Now, is that what we have?
So, yeah, well, two, kind of some of those examples. So
Okay.
like one of them would be, if their base pay is X and our pay is Y, they would get the difference between the two. But when they're in the military, they're also perhaps getting a location pay or a stipend and different. So they could, under this current policy, they could actually be getting paid more than they would get paid to come to work, government insurance. So it
For
costs,
themselves or their families too?
typically both.
Okay.
But it depends on their status. So the question would then be, you know, does the city just come in and fill the gap? Or under this case, it says that the city would basically continue their insurance. Just simply, that the city would basically continue their insurance. Just simply continue it. So the question is why would the city bear that burden if the federal government's willing to bear it? So I think that's what the chairman's talking about, is maybe just look at it to make it a little bit more feasible for the city financially, not a little bit more feasible for the city financially, not take away anything, right? Because these are people that are serving our country. We want to acknowledge that, but there's a line between overpaying it and paying what's equitable.
Well, we want them to be whole and 100%, and we want to be whole. We want them to be whole and 100%, and we want to be whole and 100%. And I think it's only fair that you utilize, and everybody's going to be different, right? You know, a single man or woman that's in the military versus the family, the insurance coverage there. They're still getting seniority, correct?
Is that addressed yet?
Pension points.
So
Yes.
Still get pension.
well, under our policy, they get pension, but the rule in Wisconsin retirement is when someone deploys, they stop earning WRS credit. But when they come back, because there's the contribution now, it used to be before Acts 10 and 32, right, because that was all in the city. But now there's an employee share. So it wouldn't pay for the city to pay their share if the employee's not going to pay theirs, right? Because that's still a burden of the employees. So when the employee comes back under WRS rules, they have 18 months to re-up all of that they didn't pay, and if they pay it, then the city pays. They no, I'm good, because they were maybe getting military credits or whatever, and that's going to their military retirement. I've had employees at different employers who've said, no, I'm not going to go pay that extra 18 months of 6.5%. I'm going to just come back when I start and go from that point. So different cities have different scenarios on that. Our policy, so different cities have different scenarios on that. Our policy, it was from 2008, so that was before the employee was ever paying anything. That was actually before we were ever on WRS as well. So there's a lot of things that are just simply outdated with the current policy as well. So that's maybe how we could start, is by next month bringing the existing policy back and just starting that detailed conversation. We can do a few comps. I have 4 cities in my head right now that I know what they do, but maybe we could get you a few more and give, so when the questions come up, we could have some options.
Okay, I don't believe we have to make a motion, but it will be on the next meeting.
Okay.
We'll go there. All right. Staffing report, Dana?
No additional openings versus what's on your sheets off that I would normally have told you that we filled. But I did remove the finance director because we did hire Denise Gilbert, who started May 23rd. We've hired the economic development director since our last meeting, John Regetz. He started May 31st. We filled the shared fire inspector that we share with Oak Creek. Jim Hilsheim, he started in April. Lauren, got promoted to the director of health and human services when Courtney left us. And then we've filled the rest of our heavy and light equipment operator positions finally. So took a lot of positions off, but we still have a lot of positions to fill. We think we're close to filling all the firefighter positions, but we're still struggling to attract police officers.
And a couple of these are we're not really trying, like the accountant position down at the bottom, that we really haven't been actively recruiting for that because we were going through the transition and we're using temporary help right now. So although that remains open, it's not because we were trying and we couldn't fill it. We just haven't tried to recruit it. Same thing with the building inspector. We did try to recruit it originally. Now we're looking at a transition plan for the building inspector, the director of inspection services, who's looking at a retirement January of 2023. So we're planning to use that as we'd like to get the existing director for 3 to 4 months. So that one we're actually not actively hiring for either. I think all the other ones though we are.
Has there ever been any discussion, I think there's one position that is kind of shared between Oak Creek and Franklin, correct? Is there common council thinking about that in any other place?
So we really haven't had any formal discussions on that. There is an outstanding resolution that the council put out. I want to say this was a couple of years ago, but there was an outstanding one that looked at potential merging of the entire fire service from community to community. There was a Wisconsin Policy Forum study done, I want to say in 2019, finished up in early 2020, and that considered Franklin, Hills Corners, Greenfield, and Greendale. The ironic part of that is Greenfield, and Greendale. The ironic part of that is Greenfield and Franklin, which are the two biggest departments, were the ones that were willing to do the consolidation, and Hills Corners and Greendale were the ones that weren't. That's kind of the current temperature of what's going on right now as well. Franklin provides mutual aid, for example, to Hills Corners a lot. Well, mutual aid costs $0. So if you're Hills Corners, you might not want that because you're getting it right now without paying for it. There's been a big push in Milwaukee County through a couple of ICC members recently that are saying, come on, we got to figure this is going to have a dollar sign or something because everybody really has to pull their own weight. Franklin shouldn't be supporting Hills Corners, Greenfield shouldn't be supporting Greendale, that kind of thing. So there's nothing formal on the table, but that's one of the big ones. That's a good possibility and has been proven to be successful in a few different areas. The other one that has been considered last month is health consolidations. I think before COVID, there was a lot more desire for health departments to merge. Knowing what happens in COVID, it's kind of like what happens with your snow. When it snows, we need our public works people just like other communities need theirs. When COVID happens, we need our health employees just like communities need theirs. When COVID happens, we need our health employees just like others need theirs. So I think that's kind of cooled down a little bit. Those are the two main ones. Same thing with police. Police is kind of like DPW. If we need officers there, they need them there. We really combining isn't a whole lot. The fire command staffs kind of lend themselves to combining isn't a whole lot. The fire command staffs kind of lend themselves to it because a fire command staff is usually a little taller, a little broader than some of the other ones, which is why that might be a good one. And the city of Franklin, like I said, has an outstanding resolution to say that's a possibility. So those are where we're at. I will tell you, shared service possibility. So those are where we're at. I will tell you, shared services on the long run is how we're all going to, as communities, survive.
Okay.
Shared services separate and distinct from mutual aid.
Because mutual aid right now is free, which again, we don't have as big of a problem. I'm going to say Hills Corners isn't that big of a footprint compared to Greendale, but I can tell you Greenfield, we've been having those conversations, and Greenfield supports Greendale a lot. Well, they don't want their taxpayers paying for firefighters that are not serving their community. Shared services in its current form, mutual aid in its current form is not equal to shared services.
Right.
All this is unrelated, but I'm just curious about the school districts. That's totally separate budget, totally different.
Some community, that's kind of another shared services area though. I can't remember if our DPW does any equipment maintenance, but in other communities, that's a shared service opportunity where the city, since we have our mechanics and et cetera, because we're maintaining our fleet, school districts usually don't have their own. That would be one, so they don't have to go out to the, that would be one, so they don't have to go out to the private market. They could perhaps come to us and we could work with them on that. So there's some opportunities there, but you're right, that governance structure is completely separate. And it's kind of territorial.
It takes a big piece of our tax dollars.
It does, and all of the, not, it does, and all of the, not all of them, but the majority are all the same people, right? We have 3 school districts in Franklin, which makes it a little bit unique, but most communities, your school taxpayers are your same as your community taxpayers, so any efficiencies that we can get benefit that same taxpayer. And we're doing, we don't have fiber right now, we pay Spectrum, we pay them a lot of money, we don't have really good service. We're looking at, not just looking at it, but the council approved back in March installing a fiber network. That fiber network is we're gonna try to share with the school district so that we can save some money. Those shared services, that's what our future looks like, because none of us can do it alone and kind of do the same thing.
All right, our next meeting is July 18th. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.